Before the beginning, there was no beginning and no end. There was only the eternal always, which is still there and will be there forever. There was only the consciousness of perfect unity. And this unity was so total, so limitless in its joyous extension, that it was impossible for anything to be conscious of anything that was not itself. There was and is only God in this reality that we call heaven. What God creates as an extension of himself is called the Christ. And this is neither separated nor different from God. It is exactly the same. Christ is not a part of God. He is an extension of the whole. True love must be shared. And the perfect love that is shared in God's universe is beyond human comprehension. Humans appear to be a part of the whole, but Christ is the whole. The only possible distinction between Christ and God would be that God created the Christ. He is the author. Christ did not create God or himself. But because of their perfect unity, this does not matter in heaven. God created Christ exactly like him so that he could share his love and eternal joy in an infinite and unimaginable ecstasy. Unlike the specific and concrete world in which you seem to exist now, this constant awareness is fascinating, completely abstract, eternal, unchanging, and one. Christ then extends himself through new creations or simultaneous extensions of the whole, which are exactly the same in their perfect unity with God and with him. Thus, Christ, like God, creates, for he is exactly the same as God. His extensions do not go inward or outward, for in heaven there is no notion of space. There is only the everywhere. The result of all this is the unceasing sharing of perfect love that is beyond understanding. Then, it seems to happen something that, like in the dream, does not really happen. For a moment, just a moment, an insignificant fraction of nanosecond, a very small aspect of Christ seems to have an idea that is not shared by God. An idea like, what if? It's like an innocent inquiry in the form of a question that is unfortunately followed by an apparent answer. This question, if it could be expressed in words, would be this: what would happen if I went to play by myself? Like a naive child who plays with matches and set the house on fire, you would have been much happier to not find the answer to this question. Because your innocence will soon be replaced by fear and the vicious defenses it seems to require. Because your idea does not come from God, he does not react to it. To react to it would be to give it reality. If God himself were to recognize anything other than the idea of perfect unity, there would not be perfect unity. There would not be perfect heavenly state to return to. As you will see, you never really left it anyway. You are still there, but you've returned to an illusory nightmare. While you traveled only in dreams, God and Christ, who are always one, continued as they always have and always will, unaffected by the tiny mind idea of separation. In this cosmic moment of apparent individuality, and no matter how attractive individuality is to you, it is only separation. There seems to be a tiny aspect of the Christ that is now aware of something else. That is duality. Now, instead of oneness, there is the two. Before, there was the perfect unity of heaven and nothing else. That's the non-duality, or the non-two, and that's still the reality. There is really no more than one thing. But now, there seems to be something else going on for you. There seems to be God and something else. This is the illusion of duality. The world of multiplicity and the subjects and objects you constantly see in it are simply symbols of separation. Although you are always trying to create, you can't really do it without the power of God. So everything you do ends up falling apart. Any baby that appears to be born into this world is simply reliving the moment when it seems to live its perfect God environment where everything was nirvana, only to be slapped in the face by an apparent hellish reality. You may see birth as a miracle, but babies are not born smiling. The spirit that relieves this apparent separation has fallen asleep, and it dreams a useless and meaningless dream. A nightmare. Because everything that seems to separate heaven symbolizes the opposite. So it seems to possess the opposite characteristics. So this tiny aspect of Christ has briefly dozed off and he dreams of separation and individuality. At this stage, we are at the very beginning of consciousness, and heaven is already only a memory. And someone will tell you how to get out of this experience. This is the beginning of the divided spirit. But fortunately, the voice of God and heaven, which we will call the Holy Spirit, is always with you to remind you of the truth and invite you to return to it constantly. Consciousness, the level of perception, was the first division introduced into the mind after separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than the creator. Consciousness is therefore correctly identified as the domain of ego. Perception did not exist before separation, introducing degrees, aspects, and intervals. Pure spirit has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. For the first time, you had to make a conscious choice. Before, there was nothing to choose. But now, there are two possible reactions to this idea of separation. This is what leads to the second division of the mind. You now seems to have both a right mind and a wrong mind, each representing a different option or a different reaction to the tiny mind idea. One option is the remembrance of your true home in God, symbolized by the Holy Spirit. And the other is the thought of separation from God, symbolized by the ego. If at this point in the story you had chosen to believe in Holy Spirit's interpretation or reaction to separation, instead of the ego's, your little dream adventure would have been over. But the ego has its own answer, selfish and tempting. If you continue to believe in separation, it offers you your own individual identity, separate from God, very special and uniquely important. The ego has to offer some kind of reward to maintain this belief. And all it can offer you is a sense of temporary existence that begins with its own beginning and ends with its own end. It tells you that this life is your existence because it is its own. Obviously, having no idea what you are getting into, you make a stupid choice. All this is new for you, and you give in to curiosity. You choose the ego in order to see what it is to be particular and separate. And this is what will cause the third division of the mind. So the first division of the mind is consciousness, which makes us think that we are separate from God, even though we can't really be. It is like dreaming in bed at night. You are still in bed, but you cannot see it. In this dream of separation, it is the dream that is real for you, and heaven is forgotten. Just as we dream at night, it is the content of the dream that we live, and it is to it that we react, while the place where we are really is completely outside of our consciousness. With the second division, we notice two different ways of interpreting what is happening. One is the Holy Spirit, our inner GPS, which is our true self. And the other is that of the ego, which pleads for its parish, if I may say so, for the separation into an individual self. The mind now has two parts. And the third division, the third level, came about when we chose the ego. So the choice of the ego is made. A new level is created, and this is your new condition. At this point, your old condition is completely forgotten, trapped in the mind. Once you have chosen the ego and caused the third division, the Holy Spirit is only a memory. You are now totally identified with the ego. However, being holographic by the grace of God, even when the mind seems to divide, each part still maintains the characteristics of the whole. So you can never really be lost. And the ego and the Holy Spirit are always in each mind. The Holy Spirit is simply drowned out by the voice of the ego, because it is the one you chose to listen to. And who you really are has been expelled from your consciousness. You have forgotten the truth, but it is still there, buried in your mind. You cannot suspect the power of the Spirit. As we speak, still on the metaphysical level, the whole storm in the glass of water that you call the universe is about to be badly created by only a few small decisions on your part. The end result will be a so-called you who is now totally unaware of the real power you have, who is virtually mostly stupid and apparently trapped in a body. This is why you can never get an intellectually satisfactory answer to any question, because the intellect is the ego, and the ego is an hallucination. You can't expect it to tell you, I am not real. There will come a time, however, when you will find answers to your questions outside the intellect, completely outside of the ego's thought system. It will be by experiencing that you are always at home in God, which rectifies the experience that you are not. In exchange of this sense of temporary existence, pure spirit offers you the knowledge of the permanence and unshakable being. No one who has experienced this revelation can ever fully believe in the ego again.
How could this meager offering prevail against the glorious gift of God?
But let us return to the moment when the third division occurred. Now you are totally identified with the ego and it has your full attention. It gives you its version of what is going on, and this is where it really starts to get messy. You ask it to explain what's going on, and it has a message for you.
The message is this: you better get out of here as soon as possible, buddy.
Then it gives you some reason. In the confusion of your mind, this seems to be very convincingly logical. It asks you in our little metaphorical story, do you know what you have done? You have separated yourself from God. You have sinned seriously against Him. Now you are paying. You took the paradise, everything He gave you, and you threw it in His face saying, I don't need you. You attacked Him. You died. You have no chance against Him. He is wonderful, and you are nothing. You have ruined everything. You are fully guilty. And if you don't get out from here right now, it's going to be worse than death. Oh my God, what I have done, you say to yourself in response to the ego. You're right. I've ruined everything and I've attacked heaven. But where I can go, what I can do? I should run away, but I cannot hide. There is no place I can hide from God Himself. That's not quite true, replies the ego, because I am here to help you. I am your friend.
And I have an idea.
We can go somewhere together. You can be your own boss and not have to face God at all. Besides, you'll never see Him. He won't be able to come into this place. Really? You replied? That sounds great. Let's go. Okay, says the ego. Do exactly what I tell you. Of course, everything the ego says about God and what happened is wrong, because he's about as sane as Hitler. God would never do anything but love you. God will never do anything but love you.
Now comes the moment when the ego will give you its grandiose answer to your nightmarish but imaginary mess. The astonishing intensity of the pain, shame, and guilt occupying your mind as a result of what you believe you have done seems to demand an immediate and total escape.
So you join the ego, and then the incomprehensible power of your mind to manufacture illusions as forms of perceptions, rather than to use pure spirit as creator, will make your method of escape manifest. At this point, the ego, with which you are now totally identified, uses the ingenious but illusory method of projection to project the thought of separation out of your mind. And you, or at least the part of you that seems to have consciousness, seems to be projected with it. This causes instantly what is popularly called the Big Bang or the creation of the universe. You seem now to be in the universe when you don't realize that you are literally out of your mind. The enemy that terrifies you, God, no longer seems to be with you in spirit.
Where you thought you had no chance against him.
Instead, God, and thus everything else is now apparently outside of you. The source of your problems, including your guilt, is now elsewhere, even if it cannot be elsewhere. The making up of the cosmos is your protection against God and your ingenious hiding place. And at the same time, the universe itself becomes the ultimate scapegoat. You can now find both the cause and the blame for the problem of separation outside yourself. If you look carefully, of course, with the ego.
Indeed, a whole new level has been created in which the thought system of sin, guilt, fear, attack, and defense can be staged so as to protect your seemingly separate mind, which you now conceive as your soul, from your terrible guilt and fear, which is still completely unconscious.
And on top of this, the ego makes, drum roll please, the body. This allows it to bring into your consciousness almost exclusively that which testifies to the reality of its cherished illusion. Yet the body itself is only a part of the illusion. And asking it to explain this one to you is like asking the illusion to explain itself.
Of course, the ego is very happy to give you its answers.
The universe, the world, and your body form a defense structure in which you hide from your imagined sin, guilt, and fear of God's vengeance. The ego has a well-established method of dealing with sin, guilt, and fear, now and consciously.
It projects them onto others.
So the creation of the universe was the fourth division of the spirit.
And that's what caused the Big Bang and what later appeared to be an infinite number of divisions or multiplicity.
And as long as we believe in the reality of this universe, we will also unconsciously believe that we are separated from God and our true nature, which is pure love. The truth about you is so high that nothing unworthy of God is worthy of you. Therefore, choose what you want in this sense and accept nothing that you will not offer to God as entirely worthy of Him. And finally, remember, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists.
Herein lies the peace of God.